Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. This is NASCA's Top 10 virtual series around our top 10 priorities for state chief administrators. We are so glad to have you. I see folks dialing in. As you're dialing in, drop a note in the chat so we know where you're here from. Drop your LinkedIn information, if you will, or find a way to connect with your colleagues here today. We're excited about today's conversation and moving forward with our top 10 virtual event series. Again, we are excited to have you. This is enhancing the holistic employee experience to compete for talent in a competitive market. I'm Pam Goins, the Executive Director here at NASCA. We have three fabulous panelists with us here today to bring the private sector perspective to this conversation. Today, we're hosted by NASCA's Operational Excellence Professional Forum. If you're interested in joining us for the OE Forum, please reach out. We'll be glad to get you connected. They meet on a routine basis to talk about continuous improvement, change management, and we're excited that the forum is hosting us here today. So again, welcome everyone. We're so glad that you're here. Again, this is a critical important as part of our monthly events around our top 10 priorities. And again, as I mentioned today, we're thrilled that we've got three representatives from our Corporate Leadership Council, and they're going to bring the private sector perspective on the employee experience and share some of those strategies around the work environment, employee growth, and the vital importance of effective leadership. And we have seen here at NASCA that employee engagement experience has consistently ranked very high on the list of priorities for state chiefs. And it was only exacerbated by the global health pandemic. And our hope is that those on the call today will use this opportunity to ask some questions of our private sector representatives, as well as share this recording within your teams. As I mentioned, please use the chat feature to introduce yourself. Let us know where you're dialing in from today, and also your social media connections so that we can reach out. If you've got questions for our panel today, make sure you submit those in the Q&A box. But before we get started today, we would like to kick off with a poll question. We want to gauge your reaction to the following question. Just one question today. Now that states are beginning to re-enter the workplace, how is your organization, state, or agency going about managing your workforce in the post-pandemic world? Is it back to business as usual? We're all back in the office full-time like we were back in early March of 2020. Are we doing some form of a hybrid workforce where we're a part-time office, part-time remote, or work from any place? Or are we really looking to transform more long-term to a remote workplace where that home office or work from any place is a natural occurring condition for all of our states? So we'll give you just another few seconds to respond to this. Again, three options here as you're looking at your own state, agency, or department. You're pretty much back to what you were prior to. Hybrid, or transforming to a remote. And here are our results. Overwhelmingly a hybrid workforce. So some sense of part-time office, part-time work from any place. All right, very, very helpful. That's going to help us frame our conversation today. So thank you for responding to that. So let me introduce today's panelist. We have Troy Winterstein. He's the Director of Cloud Application at Oracle. We have Damon Haycock, the Public Sector Program Director at Benefit Focus, and also Jeremy Spake, and he's a Senior Principal at Cornerstone. So let's kick off really with maybe just a foundation from our three panelists around what's really happening out in the market. So we know after this year of change, the workplace priorities have likely shifted, looking at location, benefits, skills of the employees. We also are hearing that there's going to be a lot of employment shift. Employees are looking for a job change in the competitive market, and we're also probably going to see some increase in retirements. So again, a question to each of our panelists, kind of to set the stage for the rest of today's discussion. From your view in the private sector, what are you seeing happening in the job market that will increase competitiveness? Damon, let's start off with you.
Thanks, Pam. I appreciate the opportunity to answer this question. And just like the poll stated, there's a big push towards flexible working environments. COVID taught us to work, produce, and succeed all from home. And this, of course, has rebalanced that work-home life. and now employees are developing expectations. So at Benefit Focus, we refer to our employees as associates. I want to tell a quick story. We have a dynamite program manager, project manager, who has led a lot of our efforts throughout the years in implementing our new customers on our solution. She ended up, like most parents, had to have her children, young children at home during COVID. And due to the fact that there was no ability to send them to school, she actually got really good at teaching them, and she decided she wanted to do that full time. Not necessarily full time in replacement of working, but was hoping for a part-time working solution. And so she ended up getting that from Benefit Focus, and her husband, who works for another private sector firm, have actually been RVing across the country, working in multiple states, months at a time, actually performing very well and still continuing to be successful. So it's very important that folks recognize that employees can be successful working anywhere. And as employers and especially states start to look at that opportunity, that this is something that should be taken seriously. Second, there's, of course, a total benefits package definition. It is expanding to include what was once nice to haves and bells and whistles to now expectations for employment across all industries. We recently at Benefit Focus performed a 2021 State of Employee Benefits Report. It was done for over 4 years, 3.5 million employees, 340 plus large employers. And when I mean large, I mean greater than 1,000 employees each, comprising of 5 generations in the workforce. And so almost 75% of these employers are now offering more choice, which is just multiple benefit types. Most are offering now supplemental benefits. 2/3 are offering critical illness and accident, and another half for hospital indemnity. And then other benefits like identity theft and pet insurance have seen a year-over-year 17% increase just last year alone. As health plan premiums continue to increase 1 to 4%, employers are also contributing more to make it affordable. And then last but not least, of course, a dedicated program to diversity, equity, and inclusion, ensuring work culture is optimized for everyone.
Absolutely. You hit on several important topics, and I know we're going to unpack more of those today. So thank you, Damon. Jeremy, from where you're sitting, what are you seeing in the marketplace?
Yeah, you're going to hear me echo some of the things that Damon just mentioned, but definitely I think there are 3 kind of big bucket areas that I've been seeing most of our clients and also Cornerstone as an organization itself really wrestle with over the last year. And I think it's safe to say no one really kind of went through 2020 unscathed from massive change. But the big bucket areas that I think that most of our clients and we at Cornerstone are really addressing are first and foremost the areas of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So many of our clients came to us over the last year, and they use our talent management solutions to kind of help embed, different people processes throughout their organization. And so many organizations, I think, if we pull the diversity levers at recruiting and kind of start thinking about recruiting a wider net of diverse population into our workforce, then kind of our diversity issues are solved. But really it's embedding an issue, kind of that lens of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging throughout the people life cycle of an employee from day one all the way through, the day that they leave. So how are you recruiting folks? How are you onboarding folks? How are you making sure that unconscious bias is mitigated in things like performance reviews or succession planning, which then translates into oftentimes how people are paid? So are you doing pay equity studies and making sure, again, that you've kind of got that loop throughout every aspect of an employee's life cycle in your organization? So that's kind of big bucket one. Second, also kind of coupling along with what Damon was just saying, was really remote work and that transition to hybrid work. And so to kind of share with you an anecdote from my own life, I work at Cornerstone. I travel a lot, typically pre-COVID for client meetings, but when I'm not traveling, I work from home. So we kind of have that work from home philosophy kind of already baked into our culture, but so many companies that we work with do not. And my husband, for example, did not. He's a software developer, worked at a company that had a very strict kind of in the office culture. Now that they've seen that people's productivity can be sustained, even working remotely over the last year and a half, they've then released those reins, so to speak. So, from our perspective, we live in Seattle, and our in-laws, my in-laws are in Georgia, and they're, kind of getting towards where we think maybe end of life. So we're thinking of relocating to Georgia to be around them. And having that flexible work option is really kind of freeing for a lot of people. And a lot of people are going to be able to access and really use that and understand that their productivity and their career doesn't have to necessarily be adversely affected if they have to make a move to kind of accommodate a life choice. But one interesting thing that comes along with that so many clients that we work with are wrestling with: I live in Seattle, I'm going to move to Georgia. There's a different cost zone in terms of cost of living in those areas. So does someone's compensation be affected if they relocate geographies? And then I'll just also say, if you're paying attention to the news in the labor force area, you're probably seeing all kinds of headlines like the tsunami, the turnover tsunami, right? Or I saw a title the other day, the Great Resignation. So many people leaving and looking for other roles, other companies. And this happens all the time after the end of any kind of downturn in the economic kind of state of our society. People kind of poke their heads up kind of as the waters, start to calm and look around for other opportunities. So you're definitely seeing that in terms of, people jumping ship and looking for better opportunities. And that's in every real labor sector of our country right now. So I would say to keep people's engagement, to retain your talent, that keeping people engaged in terms of making sure their cultural needs are being met via diversity, equity, inclusion, belongings, but also putting a lot of effort on developing people. And we're seeing a huge a huge shift towards really upskilling and reskilling the workforce, because as we all know, again, the workforce needs change so much over the last year. So making sure that the talent that you've got, you keep them, and you keep them by maintaining their development opportunities and offering lots of reskilling and development opportunities for your employees.
Thanks, Jeremy. And again, you touched on several different critical topics. Hopefully we can touch on many of those, but I think the upskilling and reskilling, our states are continuing to really look at how they do that. So many of their employees went on furlough and were assigned to jobs that they were not originally hired to do. So now, what does that mean for those employees and for the mission and vision of the agencies? Troy, how about you? From where you sit at Oracle, what are you seeing?
Hey, thanks, Pam. And thanks, Damon and Jeremy. You guys have covered most of the things that I would want to talk about. I'll just see if I can add a little bit of additional value to it. Kind of to Damon's story, right? This person who decided to RV around the country and still can work. My son has a couple of friends that were very, very highly placed out of college. They did really well in college and software engineers. And oddly enough, both of them, I live in Tucson, they both took jobs in Phoenix, a little bit away from their families and their friends. But now, after a couple of years, they are starting to just kind of bounce around different cities and states, and they'll go rent and stay for a couple of months and see what they like, and trying to determine where they want to stay, right? And the good news about that behavior and other headlines, unlike differently to the ones that Jeremy was speaking about, if you've been involved in any real estate transaction lately, you're finding that it's a very, very painful and difficult experience, because not only are rents going up really high because of this kind of behavior, especially in the suburbs and less expensive areas like Tucson, but also, home values are climbing. And when these people decide they find where they want to stay, those home values are going to continue to climb, and that's going to impact your labor market. And so the other thing that's very interesting about my son is he had a job where he was able to go home and work remotely during the pandemic. And, 3-4 months in, he had a boss who was starting to pressure them to come back into work. And he was very uncomfortable with that because he saw a lot of people running around without masks in the office and not social distancing. And so he started looking for a job, and he found another one that was pure remote, and that made him happy. And that customer or that employer lost a valuable employee that they spent a lot of money to train, right? And lastly, the retirement tsunami, certainly in our market, my job is to strategize and create relationships and opportunities in public sector, including state governments. We do anticipate, and we are starting to see that the folks are finally cashing in on that retirement wave, right? It's, the pandemic has just highlighted, I'm so sick of working, I'm going to go ahead and take it and run, right? And that's going to make it much more difficult because, public sector has already been working with reduced headcount, doing more with less repeatedly, progressively for over decade upon decade. And now you're losing all this institutional knowledge. So you need to be able to attract these people that have a whole different mindset about what work means and what location means. Lastly, both gentlemen spoke about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I'd simplify that to DEI to maybe save some time throughout the rest of the discussion here, not to minimize the value of any single one of them, right? the sense of belonging and what DEI means is a lot different than it was. In public sector, we've done a lot better, I think, historically, as Jeremy said, pulling those levers at the recruitment level. But diversity means a different thing now than it does, right? We used to have gender and ethnicity. Well, now we've got, there's political bias we might even have to start dealing with, right? You've got life choices, you've got gender preference, and figuring out how all of those things impact not only recruitment, but also, career development, promotions, and salary stuff, and doing the kind of adverse impact bias analysis that we used to do just in recruiting on gender and ethnicity is going to be very, very critical.
Thank you, Troy. Well, and again, you all have really set the conversation and will help us move forward. And I guess you really want to shift to, so why is this really important for our state leaders? And of course, at NASCA, we work around state government operations, but really, why is this critically important? And, knowing coming in that we're talking about employee engagement, the employee experience, it's really that connection within what used to be the office. Increased personal meaning, job satisfaction, and really that sense of belonging, as several of you all have spoken about this morning. But we're also knowing that in the public sector, recruitment and retention tools are pretty limited, and some of them are rigid, and they're difficult to change. We know state government doesn't always change on a dime. So why is employee engagement an important facet for our leaders? Jamie, will you start us off with that?
Sure, I'd love to. Thank you. So employee engagement is critical, and there's a really great study I'd like to reference. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Gallup. They do employee engagement surveys and have done them since the mid-50s. And they published a book back in 2019 that was kind of an amalgamation of all their findings over the decades. And of course, over the years since the 50s, they've gotten increasingly sophisticated with the types of questions they're asking in these surveys and the types of metrics they're collecting to kind of run correlations between. Needless to say, over 70 plus years of data collection, they have found and published this huge report, and their book came out and it's simply titled "It's the Manager" is the title of the book. And basically they find overwhelmingly that the number one kind of corollary factor between an employee and their engagement is their relationship with their manager. So I'm bringing this up to say that regardless of what organization you're in, all the cultural levels that you may have pulled to make sure that you've got an inclusive workplace, or that you're trying to meet everyone's needs, and that you're thinking about kind of things like remote or hybrid workforce arrangements for your employees. Overwhelmingly though, the one factor that's going to make that employee be engaged is their relationship with their manager. And I'm saying this because that means that we have to think about, all the processes that we put in place for our people, however well-intentioned they may be, managers are the ones who are actualizing this and culturally operationalizing these people processes. So we've got to put manager at the forefront and give them the right toolkits and the right kinds of, messaging and prompting to make sure that they have conversations with their employees, because their relationship with their employee, again, is the one thing that's going to keep that employee happy and engaged. So this is important because if you're having all these other organizations in the private sector who are making inroads in allowing hybrid work, allowing remote work, allowing people to move around between states, and putting a huge emphasis on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging initiatives, then if state organizations don't do the same, they're just simply going to fall behind and be able to retain that top talent. So it's critical to maintain the workforce that you want to make sure that you can, navigate future disruptions.
That's really, really helpful. Troy, how about you? Kind of same question to you. Why is this critically important to our state government leaders?
Yeah, solid points, Jeremy, and thanks, Pam. So, our state executives in NASCA and all the other National Association of State, X, whatever you decide, personnel executives or controllers or accountants or what have you, pretty consistently rating employee engagement like in the top 10, and now much more important. And so public sector, we have kind of a history of bringing in like new thought leadership, exciting people that are, trying to kind of change the game at the executive level, and they recognize this. But to Jeremy's point, it's the manager, and a lot of the managers are line folks that came up underneath and were never really taught how to manage people, certainly not to manage people empathetically in the way that's needed in our current environment, right? And I'll talk about this a little bit more later about leading with empathy, but Engagement is important, especially in this environment where you've got a hybrid or fully remote workforce, because the person's not invested. If they're not invested in their work, they could just as well be playing video games, right? As far as doing their work, unless you're really, really tuned into the metrics, and then you can be overbearing, right? So at the end of the day, the tools that you give your employees to work with, and you probably won't be surprised that here at Oracle, we're very technology focused, are very important, right? And they're important in helping you reskill and upskill the workforce, as Jeremy said. They're important in providing additional innovation. So, having a vendor and a solution that's going to help you, or it's going to continuously innovate and bring new technology to the fore that you otherwise wouldn't be able to develop and take advantage of on your own, is going to be important to engaging those employees. So at the end of the day, if you don't make work worthwhile for them, they are going to leave, and they can leave quite easily, right? It's becoming a much more liquid and mobile workforce, and public sector needs to work harder to hang on to them.
Absolutely. And again, we'll have to emphasize the job satisfaction we're hearing now is the critical component, because you're right, Troy. The movement is just exponentially higher than it ever used to be. And employees know now that they can, because they've got that opportunity to be flexible. In many states, work from any place. So you both touched on some of the actions and tools that are critically important, and I do want to make sure that we unpack some of that today. But NASCA has done a lot of work in this area, and we really looked at what states are doing, and what we've seen is a pretty consistent process, or some components that states are utilizing to ensure employee engagement. So looking at planning and setting goals, doing surveys and outreaching, actually talking with the employees, hearing, listening to them, being a strong leader in that to perhaps sit back and say, well, perhaps I'm doing something in a different direction than what my employees are saying needs to happen. So listening, drilling down in that data, having the data at your fingertips, having the ability to have it accessible to you, and then utilizing the analysis. Communication, communication, communication. Setting an action plan and aligning that with your strategic goals for your agency or department, and then that continuous feedback loop, which we've talked about so far. I'll selfishly plug a video podcast that we did with Commissioner Christy Branscombe in Tennessee on this very subject. Take some time to listen to some of the different actions and strategies that Christy is using with her team there in Tennessee. But we've got our three panelists here today, so I want to make sure that we unpack some of these critical areas of the employee experience and have each of our panelists take us through some of these strategies and practices to create those successful environments. So Jeremy, let's kick off with you. Let's kind of think through the concept of employee growth. One, what does that even mean when we talk about employee growth? But can you help us dive into those practices and policies that states might consider in this area? Some things might be onboarding, career mapping, training and learning, which you've mentioned. I loved your concept of saying DEI and belonging, and really looking throughout the people life cycle. So help us understand a little bit about the importance of employee growth.
Sure, and thank you I'm going to actually use one of the things that you just said in your comments to kind of springboard from. You mentioned kind of asking people what they want, right? And so I come from a social sciences background, and I'm a very big fan of qualitative data in a tandem with quantitative data. So I absolutely believe that you should take as much quantitative data in terms of employee surveys, but also checking in with employees around their performance all throughout the year, multiple times throughout the year. So you're getting feedback from many different employees' perspectives. So it's not just a manager's perspective on the way someone's doing in their role, and couple that with qualitative feedback in terms of conversations with that employee around what do they see their development look like? What do they see their career potential look like? And so I think the best way to do this is to kind of have a continuous performance feedback model, which at Cornerstone is something that we've been, screaming at the top of our lungs for many, many years. But I will tell you, over the last year, many of our clients who were kind of reticent to adopt that practice really jumped on board with it. And I think that's an outcome of COVID, quite frankly. So many people suddenly had to shift the way they were working. People were used to being in face-to-face environments, and suddenly they're working remotely. So having some kind of mechanism that was a quick and easy way for people to keep tabs on one another and keep in touch was something that we saw so many of our clients do. And I'll tell you that just anecdotally, we've seen so many people who have adopted that over the last year say, hey, this is working well. We're going to keep doing this over the course, indefinitely. So I think many times when people think about, how to shift to an employee growth mindset and have regular developmental conversations, the main pushback we hear is that we don't like doing the process once a year. Now you're going to make me do this 4 times a year if you're going to do a check-in quarterly, for example. So how to get people on board with the idea that conversations and having regular feedback and regular development conversations are good for employee engagement and employee growth is critical. Because also from an organizational perspective, this allows managers to collect lots of data around someone's performance over the year, have those conversations, and so that when upskilling or reskilling initiatives present themselves, they know who's ready to plug and play into a new role, who's ready to go into a stretch assignment, and having some kind of conversation in place where managers and employees both have the touch point and the culture to kind of talk about development opportunities is what propagates that employee saying, hey, I want to go here in terms of my career trajectory. So how is this organization then going to help me get there? So there's a lot of different moving factors here. So first and foremost, if you have multiple conversations throughout the course of any given year, as an employee having these check-in conversations with my manager, if I'm, addressing all the developmental activities or milestones that you're putting me on or putting me on the path on, or I'm hitting kind of all my behavioral correction marks that we're talking about in terms of our check-ins, then let's say I'm hitting all my marks over the course of the second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter, or however many years we're in this process. Well, the natural next step for me as an employee is going to ask you, what's next for me in terms of my role? How am I going to grow my role? How am I going to expand my skill set? So I think employee growth and kind of these kinds of regular feedback conversations really go hand in hand. And they also kind of help drive that cultural needle that puts employee strengths and growth as kind of the center of the process, which at the end of the day, performance management should be about the employee and how to develop them rather than about kind of correcting behavior after the fact. So I think having a really good, strong, centralized solid continuous performance management framework in place helps to propagate employee growth, but also helps to kind of keep people in line with the overarching company's trajectory in the first place. Once you identify kind of where we're going, what skills you need to get there, then you can get your workforce ready to take you there.
Yeah, great. If I can expand on a couple of things that you mentioned. One, the performance management system is critical for a state. We know that, but we're also seeing a shift now in our states. It used to be seat hours, or the amount of time that we set at our desk. Is it 9 to 5, 8 to 4? And now we're seeing some of our states really shift to more outcomes based. We're looking at those measures to ensure that it's okay if we work at 8 p.m. instead of 8 a.m. as long as our outcomes are being controlled and those objectives are met. So I'd love for you to touch on that. And then two, in that same vein, we're hearing from states that, our managers and our supervisors kind of at that mid-level range really haven't been trained in this. What are you all seeing states do to help those leaders really work with their staff and their employees to shift towards this outcome-based performance management system?
Are you directing that at me, Pam?
Yes, Jeremy, if you can just
Okay,
expand on what you're saying. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, sure. Just wanted to double check. Yeah. So first and foremost, I agree with you fundamentally that we should train managers to manage to outcomes rather than to manage, are you at your desk at 9:01 or not, right? So making sure people are getting the work done. So, I'll just say right now, I've got the best manager I've ever had, in my life, frankly, because I don't feel like I'm micromanaged, but I came from an organization right before this where the manager was literally breathing down my neck all the time, right? So I'll just say as an employee from my personal experience, that changes the way that you approach work, right? So are you given the autonomy to do your job and be able to kind of manage your own expectations? So I think that absolutely helps kind of drive that inclusivity culture and that kind of culture of belonging when you kind of have that autonomy for yourself. And then finally, in terms around, getting managers on board, continuous performance management is something that we in Cornerstone have been pushing for a long time. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, the big pushback we hear in every organization, regardless of size or industry sector, is managers just don't want to do it, right? They don't see the value in it. So that's the biggest hurdle, I think, frankly, and again, that kind of goes back to that study that Troy and I were talking about earlier. It's the manager, right? Getting managers on board with the process is critical, giving them the right tools and toolkits around how to have not only more frequent conversations, but how to make them effective and to the point. So giving them lots of guidelines about how to be a good coach. But overwhelmingly, this goes back to your point too, Pam. I think, ask managers what they want out of the process. Ask people who are living and breathing the process, what do they expect out of it? Rather than just rolling out a new process without any input from, again, managers or employees who are, again, the ones that really it's for at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, very, very, very beneficial. Troy, let me shift back over to you. Another area that we know is so critically important is the work environment itself. And that's from the physical environment to the tools to the culture, whether that be in office, in a different workplace. Help us think through that need for flexibility in a post-pandemic world, what those innovative practices might look like. We've already talked a little bit about performance management, and maybe expand on that some more, and then some other key aspects of that work environment and how the workplace has been changing.
Yeah, a lot of meat on the bone there, right? I mean, and physical environment, our perceptions about what the physical environment is and means in the workplace is all out the window. Everything that we knew up until 2020 is just completely changed. I was on a call this morning with some of our development folks, and an assignment was being tossed around, and they talked about how I suspect this was going to be managed at the dinner table or something, So, and that plays into how technology enables your environment. And the other piece of, the work environment, or another important piece, is the culture, right? So, to Jeremy's point, if you're thinking about talent management as a holistic pursuit, and in my mind, all of my training has led me to that's what you need to do, because the ultimate goal is to have a succession plan, and you really can't manage succession without having a holistic talent management and a continuous performance management that's aligned with the goals of and mission of the organization, that provides opportunity and input for continuous development guidance, and continuous learning tools, right? So, and it's an endless cycle. You get somebody who's as a succession candidate into a new position. Well, now they're just in a position to where they need to be considered for succession into a higher level position, right? So if you're doing it right, you're continuing this circle through talent management. And in today's environment, how do you have that level of engagement with employees, or how does your manager have that level of engagement with employees? Well, it's critical that your technology supports it, right? Historically, public sector, we're not real good at culturally supporting that kind of mechanism. Performance management has meant, I got to get that binder down off the shelf once a year, and everybody hates it, and nobody responds to it fully or even really cares about. And especially in public sector, everybody gets a 5 or whatever so that they get their merit increase, right, or their step increase. And it really needs to mean more so that you can measure against metrics and measure against outcomes, because at the end of the day, the daily grind, the time that you spend in your seat, is really meaningless anymore, right? And because of that, your technology and your solutions and your innovations really need to be centered around delivering that kind of culture and the capabilities to do their job and to do their HR tasks and their finance tasks or whatever on their phones. When the whole thing started, all the states were scrambling to get, laptops in the hands of their employees and set up very secure VPN tunnels so that they could come in from home without risking putting higher risk of hack and malware, right? And really, that was kind of the wrong path. We had all the information we needed to know better, because every single employee has a supercomputer in their hand, right? Like a phone or a tablet. And if your technology drives into that mobile space, and you can build policy and process around allowing that kind of usage, now your employees can work anywhere, whether they're on the way to pick up a kid from school, going to do their laundry or their groceries, or even sitting at the bedside of somebody who they're taking care of, right? So, at the end of the day, the public sector compared to us in commercial, we have a different set of customers, right? Your customers are citizens, they're your workforce, and they're your citizens. And you got to empower your workforce to be able to serve the citizens from wherever they're at. And that's going to be kind of the critical difference with public sector or similarity is that, now you need to be able to address critical citizen situations and services without having to come and sit in the seat in the office downtown.
Yeah. Well, and that's ultimately the goal, is to make sure that all of our citizen-facing functions are effective and efficient from wherever the employee is sitting. So that's really helpful, Troy. So Damon, let's unpack employee well-being. This covers a wide swath of information, both from traditional benefits, some of those non-core benefits, along with everything around wellness. And especially with the global health pandemic, this really has increased our attention around employee well-being and mental health challenges and services for all of our teams. So share a little bit about what you're seeing and some of your thoughts on ensuring employees are given that opportunity for wellness, both physical and mental wellness.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Pam. I appreciate the opportunity. Before we unpack the traditional benefits, non-core and other ones, let's kind of tee up the idea as to why do folks really work for government to begin with traditionally. It's usually those three pillars of job security. You get a defined benefit for your retirement. Often it's a percentage of your salary for life, regardless of how the economy is doing. You also get access to rich health benefits for those employees and their families, which include things like low or no cost premiums, low co-pays, low out-of-pocket costs, and they basically cover everything. And that's how it was traditionally a couple decades ago, even as much as a decade ago when we hit that really big recession. There's also holidays. When I used to tell people when I worked for the state, I got 11 plus holidays per year, plus I would get a couple of weeks annual leave, and I'd have another separate sick leave, another couple of weeks, which is often bankable. When I left state service, I think I left with 8,000 hours of sick leave or something. It was crazy. But and then again, there's a dedicated work environment. And today you've heard a lot about how to undedicate that. But one of the advantages of that dedicated work environment is that everything was provided for these employees. They had a space that was theirs, a cubicle or an office. They're provided all the equipment they needed, the computers, the internet, the phones, any of the paper products and the technology that they needed. And that they did have a standard hours that they could build their life around. If they wanted to do after work activities with their children or their families, or they wanted to plan vacations, they worked that standard 8 to 5. And then of course it shifted to things like 410s or coming in earlier and leaving earlier, or coming in later and what have you. And a lot of these were negotiated by unions. So those are the traditional benefits that folks have been drawn to in the public sector. Then of course there's those non-core benefits. And it's a plethora of supplemental benefits that are out there today, and they're often developed through separate solicitations, or sometimes they're lumped into one big partner that offers like a catalog of these benefits. And you have the big three that a lot of states are implementing even as we speak, those accident and critical illness and hospital indemnity plans that provide cash payments to help offset those loss of income during an episode of care or a crisis. These are really advantageous to folks that are enrolled in high deductible health plans, so they don't get that sticker shock when something that they cannot control shows up, or they become diagnosed with a chronic disease that frankly scares them and they have the treatment options that they have to go through. And then you also have some of the other things out there like pet insurance and identity theft protection, tuition reimbursement and tuition prepaid programs, legal assistance to help folks when they get into issues and need to, the assistance of a lawyer or a team. And then those large group discount programs on merchandise, those are often leveraging the purchasing power of the large employee populations that states have. But as you mentioned earlier, Pam, there are other factors of wellness that work in life, financial, personal, social, and mental. And so unpacking the traditional wellness part of it is many states and others throughout the public sector have implemented wellness programs, across varying levels of success. A lot of us that have seen them or participated in them or have offered them to the public sector will include incentives, right, to reduce health benefit premiums that are tied to things like health assessment questionnaires or getting biometric screenings or participating in certain events or activities. And we've seen more of a focus recently on financial and mental health, with additional programs being addressed all the time. So one of the things we at Benefit Focus do is we partner with folks across all different parts of the supplemental benefit industry. And through our partners, we've discovered some pretty sizable situations in regards to caregiving and mental health. And so we found that 1 out of every 3 employees are now caregivers due to COVID. And so now the definition of a caregiver used to be you just taking care of maybe someone who is elderly or someone who had an injury or an illness. But then now it's grown to the part of, well, now I need to check in on my neighbors, or I need to check in on other folks in the community, because there's no one out there doing these functions and they're not leaving their homes. And so we find that caregiving status has drastically increased. Stress and anxiety were number 1 and number 2 on polled surveys of employees by our partners. And so obviously trying to adapt to the new normal of us being at home and dealing with families and school and work, and again, caregiving has taken a definite toll on our folks. And so there are numerous solutions out there today to help states tackle and appropriately strategize a better approach to employee mental health. And we at Benefit Focus, we encourage utilizing, their state processes like requests for information and requests for proposals to review, evaluate, and implement these solutions that are dedicated to employee mental health well-being. A lot of states are out there promoting their employee assistance programs and providing access to either the first 3 or the first 5 or however many visits with a psychologist or a therapist to help them work through some of their mental health issues. But we need to recognize collectively that as the work environment has changed, so are the stressors, and we don't know exactly how folks are doing when we can't check in on them every day when they come to work 8 to 5. And then, of course, workplace flexibility, creating better overall wellness. I think we pounded this one home pretty hard today, allowing a balance between work and home life to optimize productivity in both. I will tell just a couple of quick stories. At the onset of this webinar, I talked about a positive where one of our associates was allowed to RV around the country. But let's talk about what happens in the public sector when flexibility is not provided. And so 2 quick stories. First is my wife. My wife recently left working for my home state, and she did so primarily because of a work environment push to go back into the office. And during COVID, she had maintained a job where she had all the technology at home, and she had to do a certain set of functions. And then she ended up moving into another position, and that position was also remote. So she had to become trained, and she had to learn a new process, learn a new team, and she was still successful at meeting or exceeding the standards of productivity. However, that team before COVID traditionally worked 4-10s, and they all would come in at 6 or 6:30 in the morning, and they would leave at 4:30 or 5 p.m. at night. And that just did not work for my wife. And so when it came time for a return to work process in my home state, everyone from her location was told they have to at least come into the office 2 full days a week. And she didn't want to sit in a cubicle for 10 hours a day doing work that she knew she could do at home and do it successfully. And so she made the decision to move on. And secondly, I have a good close family friend whose wife just had a baby 6 months ago. And this entire work from home process has saved them significant funding on daycare and allowed them both to become more involved parents during the day and to really work and bond with that new child instead of rushing back into the office. And she was told that she had to come back into the office, work for the same state, entity or the same overall state government, a different department. And she just left because she wanted to be able to be the mom that she wanted to be. And she's now looking for remote work so she can manage both work and home. And so these are some pretty critical situations to think about, and the benefits, and that understand that when we compete for folks, let me back up. When the states compete for folks against the private sector, if the private sector has work anywhere solutions and the states don't, what does that do to limit the pool of talent that you can recruit and retain? And for traditionally, there's been higher salaries and incentives and bonuses and those types of things. And what drew people back to state government was that guaranteed retirement and those great benefits, but we're seeing an erosion of both over time. So the only things that you necessarily can control is how you allow your employees to work and how you grade them on that work. And again, and I can't echo this enough, what you heard from Jeremy and Troy already about how important that manager, that first line supervisor is to creating a successful culture and an environment that really breeds best practices for everybody.
Yeah, that's perfect, Damon. And the perfect segue into our next concept. We've touched on some of the basic employee experience components and what's vital to consider for state government, but you really just hit on a key and vital aspect that we don't always think about. But we know that, leadership that is trusting and producing that effective management has a significant impact on an employee's fulfillment and their job satisfaction. I mean, we know what we're hearing is that them being visible, being empathetic, that they have strong communication abilities, and just exuding trust. Those are critical components. And not always something that we have seen across the spectrum. So Troy, let me start with you, and then I'm going to bounce over to Damon. But how can our states that are on the call focus their efforts around building those structures so that the leaders showcase those traits that we know are so vital for effective employee engagement? So Troy, we'll let you kick it off.
Sure. Thanks, Pam. Yeah, and Damon, I couldn't have said it better, right? The stories that you just told should scare the heck out of our state members, because we've been trying as a market, the public sector as a market, to prepare for the silver tsunami for forever. They've been talking about it for 30 years, right? And now we know it's coming down, but what we did not expect is an exodus of the younger employees and the other employees that we expected to be staying around for 20 or 30 years, and who are have taken these public sector jobs for the very reasons that Damon exposed. But now they're finding that it's not enough, right? So we definitely need to change how we operate and how we think about competing. And it comes down to, as Pam said, empathy, right? That policy that said you have to come in 2 days a week, that policy was not empathetic to his wife's situation or to the new schedule that evolved into her life and millions of other lives around the world, and certainly in the US and in your talent market. And it exhibits a lack of trust on the part of the employer and the manager that the employee can get that job done, even though for the last year and a half they have done so exquisitely well. I mean, here at Oracle, like Damon, I think, and Jeremy, we have been working remotely all along, but the amount of work that has landed on our table has increased exponentially, right? And we have become extraordinarily more productive than we ever were before. And we believe that states will find the same to be true, especially when they start embracing engagement and engagement around culture and DEI, which helps people be kind of more connected with one another and feel that there's trust and belonging. And all of this kind of goes to the mental state of being in the workforce, right? So Oracle did a study early in the past, I think it was midsummer, around mental health in the workplace, and unearthed some really interesting things. You can look up, it might be funny, Oracle and mental health, and see how that comes out for you. I think you might find some account executives who have burned out their mental health. But the study found things like there is a stigma around talking about stress with your boss and about mental health or your mental health challenges with your boss, or the anxiety that you're feeling about caring for your family or your loved one. And what the study found is that I think it was 65%, don't quote me, might be off a little bit, that said that they would prefer to speak to a robot about stress at work than they would with their manager. Right. And, and that kind of goes back to the earlier point about managers not being folks who were trained to manage, but people that came up through the ranks and are just like, just do it like I used to do it. Right. And so, wellness policies and wellness solutions that help enforce or enable or empower those wellness policies are critical. And that includes, things like all the stuff that Damon came up with on the benefits side, gamification of wellness that helps your employees be healthier and reduce your insurance costs. Goes on, and it's all about how your organization pays attention to what's going on in your employees' lives and going on in the world around them. The final example there, the American, I think it was the American Care Act came out last year. There were new benefits eligibility, right? There are new absence eligibilities, and people had to reconfigure their systems. All you states had to reconfigure your systems on the fly to be able to manage those eligibility plans. And if you had a modern system with a eligibility rules engine behind it, it makes that lift much less painful, especially if the employees can enroll for and input that information from home. We have a small customer up in the Michigan area, community mental health, serving the mental health needs of several counties up in that area. And they found that all of a sudden they were dealing with the mental health of their employees, and they were implementing the solution in the middle of that process. And they found that moving from paper time cards to the new system was vastly impactful on reducing the anxiety of the employees, because everything was enforced. It didn't have to go through 3 physical inboxes, and the rules were built into the system so that they could just input their time cards and know that their paycheck was going to be accurate. And that's, when it comes down to finances, that impacts your mental health as well.
Absolutely. So Damon, do you have things to add on the trust and management side?
Yeah, and I want to dovetail a little bit on what Troy said, and it just reminded me of a situation. We provide data analytics support to a southeastern state, and over the COVID timeframe, we just did their population health management report, and their telemedicine for mental health visits, their costs, they added a digit. So it went up so significantly that their employees were using that as a primary means for their mental health. But I want to shift gears just a little bit and take off my private sector hat and put back on my old public sector hat, because before Benefit Focus, I was a state agency director. I promoted over a 15-year career in my state from a line worker to a supervisor to a manager and then to an executive. And like many of us, I experienced many styles of leadership, and I morphed mine repeatedly as I grew and absorbed more responsibilities. But here are just a couple of things I picked up along the way, just the little personal tidbits, because I honestly believe that in order to lead effectively, you have to walk the walk. You have to lead from the front. You can't ask people to do things that you're not willing to do yourself. So here's just just a few quick things, Pam. I know we're getting short on time on what I was able to learn in my roles. Communication should be frequent and meaningful. You got to get feedback from your employees often, and you can't be afraid to scrap your entire communication plan and start new. As you learn from the input that you receive, sometimes it's your process that's broken. It's not the frequency. It does take time, but employees at all levels need to know how their functions affect the overall mission. Not understanding why you have to do something, but just bashing your head against it over and over every day, week after week, month after month, can really draw fatigue. And to understand what you do is important and fits the overall mission of your agency is hugely motivational. Every employee has a good idea. I learned this early on. If you never ask, you'll never get. People will sit on amazing ideas until you finally kind of poke at them and get them to open up and trust you and share. When you treat employees like adults and you provide them trust and autonomy, most of them will rise and maintain a high level of productivity. You heard Jeremy talk about his personal situation of being micromanaged in the past. And when you can let go of that natural tendency to control everything and allow your people to shine, amazingly enough, they do. Even your best employees need coaching. We all have mentorship stories of people who helped us. Be a mentor, help others succeed, even if that means they promote away from you. That's one of the biggest things I saw in the public sectors. We wanted to retain our own talent within our own agencies, but sometimes you got to let the birds fly. And I've actually had folks come back 3 or 4 promotion levels higher later because they wanted to come back and work with me in the agencies that I was at. But they had to leave to learn those critical skills and to become good leaders themselves. And then one of my favorite statements, the enemy of execution is complexity. And so when in doubt, keep it simple, consistent, and fair, and you should succeed.
Fantastic. Thank you. We've covered a lot of ground. We've also talked a lot about diversity, equity, and inclusion, the critical importance of that. But more, kind of as we wrap up this last section here, more around a sense of belonging. What does that look like? So Jeremy, let me give you the last word on this section. Help us think through some tools and strategies that our leaders can take to build a successful culture, especially when some of those employees are not in the office 5 days a week.
Yeah, so this is a great question. So let's just kind of set the stage with kind of what does this acronym mean in terms of the way that we at Cornerstone have been approaching it. So we've been using the acronym over the last year, DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So diversity is just quite simply the fact of a diverse population, right? Equity is, once you've got that diverse population in place, what are the processes you've got in place to make sure all your resources in your organization are being distributed equitably? And from a talent management perspective, that means, are you making sure that you're promoting men and women at the same rate? Are you making sure that you're, paying everyone in your organization equitably? Do you have training in place for your managers to make sure they are, got some kind of mitigation of unconscious bias when they think about performance ratings or who they're promoting for or, positioning for a succession opportunity? And then inclusion is the action that happens. So after you've found your issues, what are you doing to correct them? And then belonging ultimately is the outcome, right? And the outcome is kind of more squishy. And how do you measure belonging? And so many organizations that we at Cornerstone work with, and us as well, are doing that by measuring employee engagement surveys and seeing how that needle is moving over time with whatever initiatives that you're putting in place. And I'll just say that so many companies that we work with, and that, and again, Cornerstone ourselves, over the last year have really kind of put a pause and said, in this area, have we been doing enough? What have we been doing? And I think the answer to that is going to be different based on, what your organization has done in the past. But I think overwhelmingly you're hearing from organizations, from leaders, but really also primarily from employees, is that this is an area that is of significant cultural importance to people. So if your organization is not responding to that and thinking about that in a strategic way, then that's going to affect people's sense of belonging at the end of the day, which is going to ultimately, affect their employee engagement and if they're going to stay with your organization or not. So this is increasingly an area that I think the spotlight's been focused on, and something that I think we all need to be paying more and more attention to. So some tricks that, or some not tricks, but some kind of examples or suggestions we've been giving our clients around this area is, do assessments of your organization. There are plenty of them out there that you can do for free. We do one called the Corporate Equality Index survey every year, and it scores organizations on a scale of 1 to 100, 100 being the top, 0 being, of course, the worst, but it gives you a score on things like your organization's demographics, what kind of non-discrimination policies you have in place, what kind of inclusive benefit offerings do you have in place? And it gives organizations at least kind of a standard by which they can say, hey, we didn't score 100 this year, we scored maybe an 80, but we know where the gap is, so we can kind of fill that gap. And also, I would say, again, we've all talked about this throughout the conversation today, but managers are the critical point here. So any kind of cultural change you want to make in an organization, whether it be a people process or a bigger kind of cultural shift, like putting diversity, equity, and inclusion at the center of your organizational kind of tenet, the managers are going to be the ones operationalizing it. And they're going to be the ones that need the best training and the best support to make sure that that narrative is being fleshed out the way that you want it to be. So I'll just say that I think everyone is kind of thinking about this area in new ways, or kind of revisiting this topic and how organizations are addressing it. So if you're in that area and kind of like you feel like you're maybe starting from scratch, don't worry. I think you're in that boat with a lot of people. And cultural needles take a really long time to move. So don't forget that, if you make a change in that space, don't expect, the change to happen or to show results overnight. These things take time. So employee engagement surveys are a good way to kind of keep your pulse on that belonging aspect specifically and see how it changes in response to whatever your other initiatives might be.
Thank you, Jeremy. And those surveys are critical to be implemented, but also make sure you take them, analyze, and then take action from them. Again, we learned that talking with Tennessee recently this year. Again, so much information today. Thank you so much. We can learn so much from the private sector. You all have such great thought leadership and are experiencing this work in your state. So we certainly appreciate you bringing this perspective to our state members. So we're nearing the end of our hour, but I want to give each of our 3 panelists just about 30 seconds to share a key takeaway or a golden nugget or 2 for our states to consider when they leave today's call. So Damon, you're up first.
Thanks, Pam. And if you don't mind, off script, there was a question that was asked in the Q&A, and I think I can answer that one pretty quickly, from Heather Brooks. Mm-hmm. So how do you deal with flexibility and remote work when work can't be remote? And the simple answer is, you're not going to lose folks to your competition, to the private sector. If they're a construction worker that has to be on site, they're a construction worker that has to be on site regardless of what sector they work for. They're not going to leave because you can't remotely build a building. But when it comes to, say, healthcare workers, that was discussed in the question, I'm going to pick on like a sociologist or a psychologist that's at a facility. They can often do their job from home as well. So really evaluate the job and see, can they work remotely and can I compete? But to go back to your question, Pam, I'll just do one point due to timing. Folks on this call, you're not alone. And so NASCA does an amazing job bringing all the states and private sector together to learn best practices. We're all here to help. These issues are complex and transformative. And so leverage your existing relationships with your peers and build new relationships with us in the private sector. We invest a ton of money every year to create solutions to help you through all of this.
Thank you, Damon. Thanks for taking that question as well. Troy, what are your golden nuggets?
At this point, primarily, thinking about the composition of your workforce, contextually within the skills that you need to get the work of state government done or government done, and the skills that they have and possess and are close to getting towards moving forward those are kind of primary considerations in moving towards a holistic strategy that gives you the capability for succession planning, right? So skilling, reskilling, upskilling, having a plan to develop your workforce in a way that recognizes their contributions and accomplishments and is empathetic with the things in their life are going to be critical to your success going forward, right? And the final thing is just kind of echo Damon's point, right? Absolutely. Use LinkedIn. Really, it's not even just public sector. I mean, you've got NASCA, personnel folks have IPMA. Definitely go out to those communities and remember that every industry is doing some of the same kind of stuff or running into the same problems you have. I had a really kind of encouraging example on LinkedIn. There's a gentleman, David Kitchen, up in Lehi, Utah, posted the other day that he got referrals from folks on LinkedIn from other state governments that helped him fill a position, right? And that's the kind of networking that's going to help you go forward. And back to the question that was asked online, I might encourage you, Pam talked about work with Tennessee. Prior to the pandemic, the state had just instituted an alternative workplace program or flexible workplace program. I encourage you to look into that because for those folks that do have to be in office, there are things you can do with the kind of office they come to that would make things better. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today at NASCA.
Thank you, Troy. All right, Jeremy, I'm going to let you wrap us up this afternoon.
Sure. I'll wrap up by just letting everyone know I threw 3 links in the chat that might be good references for everybody. The first is the book that Troy and I were talking about all throughout the conversation today. It's The Manager. I highly recommend it. It's really great. I've been using it a lot since it came out with great data and statistics here, and also some really good coaching materials for managers. Then the second link is called Project Implicit. It's from Harvard University, and it's a way for people to do individual tests to kind of see what their biases may be. So I've been doing a lot of those. I know a lot of our clients have been doing them, and it's a really good self-assessment tool to make sure to highlight your own biases with whatever they may exist. And then third was the Corporate Equality Index survey, which I mentioned at the end of the conversation today, which I think is a really good free organizational assessment that companies can do to score them and let them know how they're doing on things like inclusive benefits and inclusive cultures. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. And I appreciate you dropping those in the chat for everyone. Well, thank you all for joining us today. This has been another excellent conversation. This one focused on employee engagement and the experience and how we ensure that our states are working towards that. Thank you to everyone that attended. Let me thank both Troy, Damon, and Jeremy for giving of their time today. Again, these are excellent corporate council members of NASCA's, and we appreciate all of their engagement with all of our members. So thank you for your time. Know that this session has been recorded. It will be posted to the NASCA Knowledge Center in about 10 days where you can watch on demand and share that within your teams as well. All 3 of our panelists today have said they would be happy for you to contact them if you'd like to ask more questions, do any follow-ups, and I'd be happy to make those connections for you. So again, thank you so much for joining us today for our Top 10. Our Operational Excellence Professional Forum will meet again as a group on August the 10th. If you're interested in being with us that afternoon, drop us a quick note. We'll make sure you're added to that distribution list. Thanks for joining us for NASCA's Top 10 virtual series. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.